seeing that pawn actually, is in his throat a little bit, and maybe I can protect it somehow a little bit later on. He moves his king out of the way. Again, there's no real reason for him to keep it on this diagonal. He doesn't want his king on this diagonal because that could interfere in case he wanted to swing his rook over, or if eventually he got his queen down here and wanted to bring one of the rooks, that would interfere. He doesn't want it on this file because he doesn't want it on the same file as my queen. And so why not put the king in the middle, get it as far away from the action as possible. So I decided that I needed to. First of all, I realized that this pawn was now hanging, except for the knight. So just to develop a little bit of a weakness and put my rook on the same square as his king, I decided to trade off the pawns over here, and also, of course, to take away a threat. To take away before I do this, if whatever later on or whenever he wants, one major threat that he could have is f5. I mean, think about it. If he moves f5 over here, I can't take this pawn with this pawn. Because if I do that, then this pawn hangs, then the h pawn hangs, he just comes down here, and now he's got doubled knights on a wide open file. This file would be open because I would have taken, and my king would be in a little bit of trouble over here, especially with the two rooks bearing down on it. So I really don't want this pawn to come down here. So I trade it off. He trades it off with his bishop. Again, this pawn is very weak now for him. It's protected by the knight right now, but my rook is bearing down on it, and it's pinned to his king. I put my knight. I wanted to centralize it over here. Again, first of all, this pawn was hanging. The f pawn was hanging to his queen and bishop, and I was only protecting it with my queen. So this move accomplishes a whole bunch of defensive and offensive purposes for me. First of all, it allows me to threaten it allows me to threaten g4. My knight can always move to g4 a little bit later on. That's in the air, threatening the rook. Maybe if threatening, there could be some interesting knight forks that could be available a little bit later on in the game. It centralizes my knight. It brings it in the game. It now attacks a whole bunch of squares. It defends this pawn over here from the queen. He can trade it off if he likes. I mean, certainly, if he would trade it off, he would trade off the knight. I would probably take it with my rook just in order to keep the pin on this pawn. So he sees that. He sees that he doesn't like this idea that his king is on the same file as my rook. With my knight, that can move at any time, and his very weak pawn over here. So he continues to move his king across the board. Figured just get it out of trouble. I move my other rook, again, to centralize it, number one. To put it on the same file as his king, even though there's more pieces in between. And, of course, also to protect the d-pawn. The d-pawn is now not hanging anymore because the bishop and the queen are attacking it twice, assuming the knight leaves, and the queen and the rook are defending it twice. That was a mistake when I did that, because his next move, I didn't even see it. Again, it's a little bit of a time pressure game. Is he plays bishop to g5 and I lose a rook. Obviously, he wins the exchange. Now remember, at this point, I was up. Well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns to 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. So I was up by 3 pawns. And now I'm going to lose the exchange, so I'm still going to be up with a point overall. The interesting thing about this is that even though I lost the exchange on this play, it probably wasn't the end of the world for me because his bishop was really in a very strong position, very strong attacking position, and him giving up his bishop, I of course played queen d6, that was my only choice. He played bishop takes d8, rook takes d8. I lose the exchange, but I get his bishop out of the way, and I'm down the exchange in terms of pieces, but I'm still up by a few pawns. I'm really still not in a terrible position at all. So now is where the board starts emptying. He played again, he had a kind of a weak knight over there on the d file, so he wants to trade off with my relatively strong knight. I really didn't see any reason not to, because my knight really wasn't going to do anything. I guess, well, if I had to do it over again. Oh, okay, I mean, I guess I could have moved my knight to c4, threatening, well, this is protected by the rook anyway, but also his knight is threatening to come to b5, that checks my queen. It's threatening this square. If this pawn ever leaves, it's protecting this square. So I really had no interest in having his knight be in the game, and so I traded it off. Now, at this point again, I'm down. I have a bishop, a rook, and a queen a queen and 2 rooks. I'm up by 3 pawns in terms of pawns, and I have really a pretty strong my pieces are focusing really on his queen side. His king is in the middle of the board and my rook can get on this open file. My bishop is slicing into the long diagonal, the long a1 h8 diagonal, and so my queen, I figure I'm not going to I'm not going to do much on the king side. Obviously, he has both of his rooks there, and he's not going to do much on the king side. With no minor pieces on the board, his attack potential to break through this pawn structure really isn't too high. So I played queen b3 check. Now, what should he do in this scenario? I guess he doesn't want to. He could move his king back, but he decides to move his king a little bit further towards my queen, which I think, in retrospect, was a little bit of an inaccuracy. He moves his his king to c1, and that kind of hems it in over here. Again, I can't play d2 right now. Eventually, I'd love to play d2, especially if this pawn weren't there. But I try to just increase the pressure a little bit. Rook to c8 to pin this pawn. Maybe a5 and b4 are in the air. With this pawn pinned, the queen is bearing down, the bishop is bearing down. This pawn eventually would love to move to d7 when and if the time permits. And actually, now this pawn is hanging, and that's what happened in the next move. He took the pawn, and really there wasn't really no way I could defend it. I mean, I could have sat here with the queen all day to defend it, but really the move before, the reason why I let this hang is because I saw my next move. This was really the key point in the game. Again, at this point now he's gotten one of his pawns back, so in material we're dead even. So I thought about this for a while, and I knew this idea, this bishop sacrifice had been bubbling up in my mind for a couple of minutes as I was moving these pieces and as I was getting my queen and rook into position. And now I calculated it just a little bit. I didn't have that much time, obviously, but I figured now's the time to go for it, and I played bishop take. It was not really a sacrifice, as you'll see in a minute. I played bishop to take c3. Now, if you look over here, with bishop takes c3, I get a pawn, obviously. Now, he can't really take back this bishop. Obviously, he can't take this bishop with the queen, because then the rook takes the queen, and he's lost the queen and... well, one second. So he's lost a queen and a pawn for a bishop and a rook, which is, obviously very bad for him. If he can't take it with the pawn, because then I simply take rook takes c3 check, and then he loses his queen. So now this bishop is, and so the question is, what does he do next? Now, one option, I suppose that he has is, well, look, he can't leave his king on this square. He really doesn't want to leave his king on this file, because then I have some deadly discovered checks. Maybe, well, let's see, bishop, if it were my move, and he were still on this file, if I played bishop d5 check, discovering the rook, now then he could just move the rook in front. No, but that would hang the queen. See, notice that his queen is unprotected. This would really be a brutal discovered check when I move my bishop. If it's my move over here, I move my bishop over here. I move my bishop anywhere, and he loses the queen, because it would be check from the rook. He couldn't move the queen in front because then the rook takes it, and if he moves the king, so the queen falls. Oh no, one second. He could move over here, protecting the queen. Oh no, so I would move my bishop back. So I would move either bishop a5 check or bishop b4 check from the rook, and then he couldn't move the king to d2 to defend the queen, because that square would be taken by the bishop. So he really doesn't have much of a choice. He can't move his king here. So he has to move his king at some point. If he plays his rook over here, then what? What if he plays his rook to d4? Oh, okay, one second. If he plays his rook to c2, then I get the queen anyway, because then I play bishop takes b2 check, and he can't take it with the rook, because that would be pinned against the king. He can take it with the... In fact, let me even play it out. I can... well, okay. So actually, I don't know if I can play it out and then have the same moves forwarded. So let's try to imagine it. Rook to c2, bishop takes b2 check. Then, yeah, the king's got to move. The king has to move, and then the queen hangs. So he can't do that. So his king has got to move. He can't move here, obviously. He can't put the queen in front, because then I just move the bishop, and it's... Oh, no, one second. If he moves the queen over here, maybe that would... No, okay, no. If he moves the queen over here to c2, Then I again play bishop takes b2 check, and he can't take the queen. He can't take it with the queen because then because